I have a garden, a vegetable garden, and I've got 3 birds sitting on the hoop around my jalapeno plant, and they look like they're trying to get at it, but they're not really doing anything. So I think I'm just gonna leave them sit there for now. But if I have to run away real fast and everything falls over, you'll know why. It's because the birds have breached the perimeter of the jalapeno. Hello again, everyone. Welcome to September's Indie Book Club and our countdown to Halloween. It's not really much of a countdown. It's, 3 books. But last month we had, of course, Chelsea Callahan's Eyes of the Grave, a very fun urban fantasy adventure. This month we celebrate our 4th and our final Vegas owned writer for the year with Alex McKenna and the Geranium Deaths by Vicki Ann Bush. In the town of Floral Park, New York, something terrible is happening. Every 6 days for the past few months, one of the town's longtime residents has died, each one with their heads encased in a block of ice. Transgender 17-year-old Alex McKenna comes from a long line of witches who know how to communicate with the dead. Though he hasn't been a medium for long, he knows the work of an angry spirit when he sees one. With the help of his best friend and secret crush, Margaret, and his grandmother, he must find the spirit responsible and convince them to stop or send them on their way. The answer will take him to the one place he never expected, his own home. So I came across this book by way of coffee house tours here in Las Vegas, which is a group of writers that goes around and does signings at bookstores, of course, but also coffee houses, coffee shops, and community theaters in different places. And the person who runs it is Vicki Ann Bush, who's the author of this book. So that's how I met her, and that's how I got clued into this book and the rest of the Alex McKenna series. Funny thing about this month's book is when you write a well-crafted story, the reasons for reading it are pretty obvious, as are the things that you take away from the book, specifically what the writer did well, what worked. So this month, the writer's takeaway and the reasons to read are kind of meshed together. I'm going to do my best to kind of split them out, but really it's all sort of one thing. Number 1, nails the basics. We talk a lot about books on this show. Obviously, if you've seen any of the episodes, you know that that's kind of our thing. We do talk a little bit about what makes a good story and what makes a bad story. Now, for the most part, good and bad are gonna be really subjective terms. It's gonna be very much up to whoever's reading the book to decide whether it was good or bad in their own estimation. However, there are certain things that we can say make a book technically good. So good from a technical standpoint. And that's a lot of what we've covered on some of the writer's takeaways in previous episodes. So in this case, you have a very clear, complicating event. You have people are dying every 6 days. That's bad. The stakes are obvious. People are dying death. The goal is to figure out what's doing this and stop it, stop people from dying. And all along, there are obstacles being introduced. Either, a witness doesn't want to talk, or they have to go to school. It's a very blasé kind of obstacle, but it's a very real one. It nails the basics of what makes a story good, engaging, readable, and it makes you keep wanting to turn the page. Number 2, honors its hero and everyone else. As is obvious, the book is titled with the main character. Alex McKenna is obviously the main character in this book. He's the medium, the transgendered teenager, and this is going to follow his journey trying to get this spirit to stop murdering people, and also the sort of side plot of discovering more about himself as a high schooler and as a transgender high schooler on top of that. Now, when you have a book that has a main character in the title, you kind of run the risk of picking up the book and the main character is probably going to be very well fleshed out, very well understood by the writer. They're going to spend a lot of time in that character's head, and a lot of times it comes at the expense of everyone else in the story. It would have been really easy, for example, to make the love interest, Margaret, Alex's best friend, kind of, you know, just a regular high school girl. And, you know, to some degree she has to be, because that's the relatable factor. But she also, you know, has very specific traits. For example, she loves food, specifically desserts. So she's talking about that a lot. She has a problem with driving too fast. She's a little bit of a lead foot. She, from the beginning, knows Alex's situation as a transgender boy. And so her romantic interest in him makes her a compelling character to read about in that regard as well. Alex's mom could have been just a suburban mom who's like, do your homework, you know, go to bed on time, and she's not. She is full-blooded Italian. The family that we're dealing with, the immediate family, the mother and the grandmother, are both Italians. So that is a very strong characteristic that is portrayed in many different ways, both through personality and through cultural cues. And they are also witches. It runs in the bloodline. So they both have this magical ability as well, which makes them more compelling characters than just normal suburban family with one interesting child. Number 3, sensory language. You've got a plot that moves, you've got characters that are engaging. That is your, you know, probably 75% of a book. That's like what really is what's making it go. That's the engine. The next thing you have to consider is, how's the writing? Does it engage you? Does it pull you in? The way to do that best is through sensory language. We talked about this a little bit last month from the other direction of avoiding filter words. Instead of telling you how someone felt, you show them the feelings that they're experiencing. This book specifically does it beautifully with taste, which really works for the characterization of an Italian family. I'm half Italian. Food solves everything. Food is a very big deal to us. So it really helped not only with building the character, but it also really pulls you into the story and really makes you want to keep reading. I'm just going to read a small piece, a very small piece, just one paragraph, to kind of illustrate, to show you what I'm talking about. His gram sat at the table, skimming over the newspaper, a cup of coffee nestled in her hands. The bread was on the counter with a large stick of butter softening next to it. Sunlight was beating into the bright yellow kitchen, warming Alex and bringing a welcoming calm to his chilled bones. Pouring a mug-sized cup of joe, he pulled off 2 large pieces of bread and slathered the butter on. The dough was soft, and the golden goodness seeped into the heat, drizzling off the sides into the crisp brown edges. To Alex, a slice of his grandmother's homemade bread was the closest thing to heaven on earth. My mouth is watering just reading that. So the alternative to something like that is, he ate bread, it tasted good. It communicates what happened perfectly fine, but it doesn't give you that experience of eating a warm piece of bread with butter. Movies and visual mediums have an advantage here because, you know, they can show you bread with butter and how delicious it is if they're so motivated to do so. Books have to try a little bit harder, but when they do, it's even more effective because a book is so personal and everyone has that, you know, experience of eating bread like that. Hopefully, if you're gluten-free, I'm very sorry. Truly, very sorry that is not a fun experience for you. That sucks. The other parts of this paragraph that I think are worth mentioning here is there is a little bit of sensory in terms of like touch. Specifically, sunlight was beating into the bright yellow kitchen, warming Alex and bringing a welcoming calm to his chilled bones. Could have been, you know, perfectly sufficient to say he walked into the warm room. He felt warm. I mean, that's kind of, no, I don't think anyone would really write like that, but it communicates the information. This kind of thing, sensory writing, sensory language, is the difference between putting a story on paper and truly writing a story. But that is why books are worth reading, is when you have that sort of prose. Of course, you don't want to overdo it, but when you have that kind of thing happening and that those really meaty little moments and words that you can really bite your teeth into, so to speak, that's a really enjoyable experience for a reader, and it certainly was here for me. So we'll call that the wrap up on why it's worth reading. That's the stuff that's really, really relevant to readers. Is the plot interesting and, moving? Are the characters people that they can relate to? And, is it fun to read? If I can teach you anything at all ever in life, in this series, that's it. Like, plot, characters, language. Everything else is kind of secondary. If you got those three things, you got a pretty good chance of having a book that people are going to want to keep reading. For the rest of the writer's takeaway, we're going to talk a little bit more. We're going to dive into a little bit more about storycraft and stuff that maybe, a reader might like, they might appreciate, but it's stuff that they probably don't know that they're appreciating. The first thing we're going to talk about is the successful use and subversion of tropes in Alex McKenna #1. Because this is such a straightforward, simple ghost story, it has the opportunity to do a lot of subverting and just exploiting tropes. There's nothing wrong with exploiting tropes as they are, as long as you're not doing it in a way that, feels like you're copying something else or like you're ripping something off. But people, there are whole industries, romance, for example, they use the same tropes over and over and over again with very little actually innovating them or changing them in any major way. And people still read it. They love it. Detective stories, cozy mysteries, they tend to follow the same beat structure. And people read them. These are very heavily read genres. There's nothing wrong with tropes, as long as you're doing something a little bit different with them. So Alex McKenna uses a couple of different tropes. The first one, as I said, is the vengeful ghost or the haunted house story. The vengeful ghost story I can't really talk about too much because that would give a lot of stuff away, but suffice it to say, it is a story about an angry ghost that is pissed about something that happened in the past and is coming to seek revenge. And you don't really need to do a lot with that, That's something that's always going to be fun to read. It's the details that come into that. What is the history? What is the tragedy? Is that unique? The haunted house thing, where the angry spirit is, haunting a house, that's also very used in ghost stories. This one, mild spoiler, just so happens that the haunted house is where the medium happens to live. It's his house. So that's kind of fun. That's a little bit of a subversion and a surprise. The next trope is a little bit more of a modern trope, but it's the I see dead people trope, or the sixth sense trope, where, you have a character that is sensitive, that is seeing dead people. And there's, that is used many, many, many ways, from, the sixth sense, where it's this little boy who doesn't know what's going on, to something like The Frighteners. He starts a con business, basically, of fixing haunted houses, but the ghosts are actually kind of on his payroll, so to speak. So this is a widely used trope, but almost always, invariably, it involves someone being alone. They work alone. They are either isolated because of this gift and they don't know what to do and they don't want to be isolated, or they choose to be. In this case, you have the opposite of that. Alex is the latest in a long, long, long familial line of witches that can talk to spirits. He has 2 generations of support above him, who are very involved in the story, his mother and his grandmother. And the last trope, which is not really a trope, it's more of just a general thing that stories incorporate, is the love story aspect of it. Mostly it's a trope just because it's kind of cliche to have a romance as a B storyline, but so many people do it. I mean, I do it. Almost everyone does it. That it's like just sort of, yep, that's going to happen. It is a little bit of a surprise and a little bit of a unique situation, like I said earlier, that Margaret is a girl, Alex is a trans boy. She is fully aware that he is a trans boy. There's no like, oh, should I tell her or not situation. It's completely out in the open. And they do strike up something of a little romance. They don't wait until the very end to get together either, which is why this is not really a spoiler. It happens about, I would say, halfway through the book. And you know from the beginning that Alex very much likes her, and she's a little bit all over the place. You think probably, you can't really tell, and then it comes out. Along with that, and the other point I want to make about storycraft and things that writers put into stories that readers appreciate but might not be aware of, is themes and morals. You chose to write this book for a reason. And it's not just, oh, I wanted to tell a ghost story about a kid who's, sees ghosts and then defeats the ghosts, maybe. Who knows? I'm not going to spoil it for you. There's typically a lesson or a message that you're trying to get across. Now, the thing about messages is you can put in any message you want into a book. And you can put that book out in the world and think, hooray, I delivered my message, it's all great. But the reader is going to be the one to determine what the message actually is. And it may not be the message that you meant. I have not spoken to Vicki Ann about her motivations for writing this book. Perhaps I will on the Neon Salon at some point or in another venue, but going off of what I felt the message of the story was, primarily, I thought the goal of the story was to start to normalize the issues of transgendered teens. And the reason I say that is because the story, the ghost story, the main story of the book, the main conflict of the book, actually had very little to do with the fact that Alex was trans. It wasn't incorporated really at all. It stood completely separate, which I have to say, I was a little bit, not disappointed, but I was expecting that the fact that Alex is, born a girl and transitioning to a boy, and the fact that the other people in the line above him are women, and, I was sort of like, oh, well, that might have been an interesting thing to explore. The fact that maybe he's the first male witch in his family now that he's transitioned. But honestly, I kind of appreciate that it wasn't incorporated in the main story. Alex's situation was treated as just, another medical condition that needed to be addressed by the family. He wore a brace. He was pre-op, so we saw a scene with his doctor talking about his meds, talking about next steps. This is just this is a thing that Alex has, and it's just something we're dealing with. Of course, there was some aspects of bullying. There was references to difficult times in the past, but because Alex is 17 and has been in this transitory phase for, it seemed like, a number of years, there wasn't a whole lot of mental conflict about whether or not this was working or how it was all going. That part, being trans, is just sort of a part of his character and not really, a big deal compared to a lot of other books, which I think is appropriate given that Vicki Ann Bush is a woman and not a trans male teen. So it can't possibly be an Own Voices story, and any attempt to try to portray the anguish of a trans teenage boy probably would have come off as disingenuous, fake, and it didn't. Alex feels like a very real character, very relatable character, and a very sweet character. So I think that was handled beautifully. Hopefully I have sold you on this book, Alex McKenna and the Geranium Deaths by Vicki Ann Bush, a Vegas writer and a good friend of mine. As you can see, it is an award winner, which honestly I just noticed right now. My powers of observation are not super great. I'm more up here. I make things up. I'm not a journalist, I'm a fiction writer. But yes, it has won the Reader's Favorite in the Book Award. Reader's Favorite Book Award. I don't know what it is. I'll figure it out and I'll put something up here and I'll explain my idiocy to all of you so you know exactly what this book won. It is part of a series. It's 4 books. 3 are available now, including this one, and the 4th one I believe is forthcoming. There's a lot of delicious moments, a lot of good thrills, and a good message. Next month, we finally hit October, which is my favorite month because it's got my favorite holiday in it. And I am extremely excited to be able to talk about the paranormal satire book, Deadheads, Gloomwood Book 1. Not to be confused with the Deadhead series by another Las Vegas writer that we will talk about probably on a future episode. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube yet, please do. It's right here. If you're right here, it's right here. And like the video. Also make sure to turn on notifications for the channel if you want to get alerted when new videos come out. As always, we are available on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, and Amazon for our books. I'm also very excited to announce that the Ugly Cat Press is now offering editing services. So if you are a writer and you have a book and you think, hey, it would be really useful to have this sort of feedback, like the kind you see on Indie Book Club, before I actually publish the book, feel free to contact me through my website and we will see what we can do for you. I hope you have a great September. Definitely check out these October-ish, ghoulish reads that we are recommending right now, and we will see you closer to Halloween.